So I've started the Workbench project, but I've been cheating and I've not been running the camera because I couldn't do it. I knew I had too much to learn and too many tools to buy and break in that I needed to get familiar with before I started showing you guys the mistakes I was making. So let me catch you up. The first cheat was making this shadow box because I had to practice dovetails. I've never cut a dovetail in my life. Ken's cut a lot of them. He's got the jig for it and I had to play with that. So I made this as a shadow box to display some of the things that my friend Cy Swan has made and given to my folks and to me over the years. It turned out okay. I've got plenty to show you about the mistakes I made in dovetails and why I hope to do better on the bench. The second cheat is an upscale similar maneuver, and that is I'm building about 1/3 of the Ken Jordan Shaker style workbench to put my little DeWalt planer on so I can roll it around the shop and match the table height on the new bench when it's done. Gives me a chance to practice with the router lift table, the bits, gluing up some panels, and just the things that a carpenter has never or rarely done, but that a furniture maker has to do every darn day. I've always loved the look of dovetails, but I've never got my hands onto that process, and I haven't cut any by hand yet. But Kenny gave me a chance to use his jig, and this was my first attempt. And the cuts are pretty nice, and I was moving super slow, but it's just a little loose. I mean, Ken said, no, it needs to be a little tighter. It needs to sort of fall into the 90-degree orientation. So we adjusted that really complex and brilliant jig, and I cut these on this box, and in some ways they were better, in some ways they were not quite as good. I learned that I have to pay attention to when I'm climb cutting and undercutting with the router, especially as I'm coming out on this face grain. I've learned that I need to scribe a little cut line right there to keep blowout from happening on the bottom of the tail side. I just learned that I have to use a sharper bit and feed carefully. Otherwise, it's just a little ragged. And this is the last place in the world that I want anything to be ragged. So here's the thing. I made a little French cleat system out of 1.5 by 1/8 by 1.5 bar stock. I like to do that. I've got a welder. My friend tells me I could go to Home Depot and buy one of these for a lot less and a lot faster, but doggone it, it's sturdy. And if you want something sturdy, a little steel French cleat system will really hold it on the wall. So the dovetails, practicing the dovetails is because all of the drawers in this thing, and in some of the drawer guides and in various places, there are dovetails. And I didn't want this to be the first time I got tangled up with that really intricate and brilliant jig. So we've got this behind us, and we're just about to start in on this, except instead of doing the whole enchilada, I'm doing about 1/3 of it. Now that's the front. And I'm doing something similar to this, about that much of that bench, only it's going to have this number of drawers. Okay, here's a full-scale drawing. Little drawers, 2-inch thick deck, drawer, 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 dovetail, dovetail, but the same frames on the end and on the back. Similar panels, the shaker detail is going to be consistent. So with that out of the way, and with a good start on maybe what I'm going to try to do, I'll show you the mistakes in just a minute. So far, the first thing that I did was glue up the top. So that was a bit of a lie. The first thing I did was glue up the side panels, and I took them to Matt Hallman at Hallman Woodworks, and he called me up and he said, Scott, those joints are so bad, we cut them apart, glued them back together, and he's going to surface it down for me. But these are better. I had a 2x live edge that edged down to 13 inches wide. So 3 of these things after jointing, I'm about 38 inches wide right here, which is exactly what I need on the bench. This is going to be the top on my little roll-around bench that's going to hold my planer. So here's how this turned out. The joints are adequate. Flatness is, a little belt sander work. I'll get it pretty good across these joints, and I think it's going to be, it's a practice bench. But I think it's going to be good. One thing, there's some controversy about whether or not you should alternate the orientation of the grain in boards like this, so a tendency to cup this way is offset by a tendency to cup that way and a tendency to cup this way. Now, cupping is not good anywhere you get it, but I just dispensed with that, put them in the same way so that the face looks the way I want it to, because the other sides of the boards had some defects that just needed to be hidden. So these are the components for the 2 end frames, half lap joints, and I have discovered a couple of discrepancies in the plans, which we'll point out, or actually we don't need to point them out, we're just going to have them corrected by the time I start the big project, and a discrepancy in my brain, in that the top notch in the top of this end frame, I just got wrong. But I'm going to press ahead using these pieces anyhow, because I'm not making new ones, and I'm not going to make that mistake on the real bench. But in general, half-lap joints that I cut on the table saw. By the way, can I just say that this SawStop table saw is exceeding my expectations every time I walk up to it, so thank you, SawStop. More to say about that later, because I did detonate the safety feature the other day, and not with a finger. But in general, using the SawStop for the half-lap works okay. I think I'm going to use the router on the router table when I do it on the bench. We're learning that. I've got a couple examples here of it just not being ideal, or my operation not being ideal. But the end frames are significant. They're going to be routed to receive the panels, and all of the notches that have yet to be put in there have to be put in there. Then we'll glue it and clamp it and be ready to start assembling these things sometime in the next few days. So this is an end frame. These are parts for the other end frame and the rails. And there's at least 2 mistakes that I'm ready to talk about on this. One in my interpretation of the plans, and 2 in my assumption that close would count on the final dimensions on the pieces. So let me talk about that first. In order to plane out a few defects, when I was just kind of leaning into this, I went a little undersize on the 2 3/4 inch dimension. Which, I mean, a 1/16 of an inch here, a 1/16 of an inch there, I thought, what the heck? It's proportion that we're after. Well, when I do this on the bench, I'm going to be very careful to get exactly 2 3/4 by 2 1/4, because it makes the math so much easier in calculating the depth of these half laps. So, lesson learned. Sometimes close just doesn't count. So sometimes the allowable tolerance is perfect. Thank you for teaching me that, Ken Jordan, and enforce that, will you please? He does. So since I'm primarily a saw guy, I just assumed that I would make these half-lap cuts on the table saw. And Ken concurred, and he educated me on this little stop block. What a great idea that is. There's the distance, and here's the move. But that's not near as sexy as it's going to be when I'm using this router table. I put a SawStop lift in over there. I mean, you got to ride for the brand, right? Well, it's a brilliant little machine, and I can't wait to use it. And I'm going to use that on the real bench for making the half-lap joints so that these mating surfaces are really smooth instead of just fairly smooth. So as I wrap this up, let me just go through some of the costs, some of the money that I've had to spend to tool up. Because I mean, there's this incredible continuum of tool quality and tool price, and how much work you're going to do with the tools, and how do you justify the money. Well, it's a different calculation for every person and every project, and I decided that I needed to go high, middle of the road, pro-level tools. You don't have to do that. But Grizzly is a middle of the road pro level. It's not the top, it's not the bottom, but I knew I needed an 8-inch joiner. I wanted a 6-foot bed. I got a 5.5-foot bed. It's plenty. But I'll tell you what, I didn't check square on the fence before I jointed the first boards for the panel, and it wasn't quite square, so bad on me, but it's square now, and we'll get better at joining these panels together. The next tool that I watched for, and this came to me not through Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, which are, a savings location. You can save money if you start looking in these online forums. This came through a friend, and it's a pretty nice jet tool. It's a nice drill press, but the thing that makes it really nice is Ken gave me this foot switch, okay? So I can hold the board, I can bring the Forstner bit into contact with the work, and boom. So that took a pretty solid drill press to the next level for woodwork. Thanks, Kenny. So I've just started with dust collection here in the last couple weeks, and I see now why you need dust collection in a wood shop. I'm just taking it from tool to tool. I'll do that differently in the future. And I got so much good advice for you guys in the video that I did about this thing. I picked this up, I think, almost 2 years ago now, and it's so mobile, and I can move it from tool to tool, but I do not intend to ever run these tools much without having this thing going. So I've known that if you're going to do woodworking, you don't want to skimp on your router. And so years ago, I threw away my Sears Craftsman and I got this 690 Porter cable. It was sort of this was a big dog. And I used it a lot on decks and outside rougher work beams, and the pistol grip was great. And so I ended up with a big Porter cable router, 3 1/4 horse for the router table. This saw stop lift it's just a brilliant piece of engineering. I love it, but I've got to learn how to use it, right? But I knew that I didn't want a mixed up bunch of routers with different collets and different bushing guides, and I wanted Porter cable, but Porter cable's not even making these anymore. I mean, Porter cable has fallen from its glory days. So Craigslist to the rescue. I checked that, actually Kelly checked that, and there was an ad for a Porter cable router in new condition from back, I think, in the 80s when these things were Cadillacs, and it probably has $300 worth of router bits in here. Now, some of them are cheap, but some of them are expensive. And the whole deal, $175. I mean, I sprained my wrist reaching for my wallet on this, and I'm just delighted to have it. So I'll show you the other Craigslist score, and it really made it possible for me to jump in because I was starting to pinch my pennies. The dollars had been running out, and the project wasn't getting built. And so I'll show you the bar clamps that I picked up, and now I have no excuse, or at least it's going to be harder to come up with the excuse for why the project may turn out maybe not quite as well as Kenny's, or for that matter, yours. Now, speaking of that, we're going to make these plans available. The plans will be tuned up. There's been a couple little discrepancies I found in there, and Cody will clean it up, make it right, and when I get to the end of this, after you've watched me blunder my way through this project and then hopefully move forward a little more smoothly on the big bench, if you want a set of plans like that, we'll let you know how to get it. But if you want the conversation about how the project's gone, you ought to check out the Essential Craftsman Academy. Because on Shop Talk, which is a forum of dozens and dozens of sharp guys that get together every other Thursday, we talk about everything from projects to tools to problems to engineering. All of it is on the table. And a big part of that conversation is going to be the Ken Jordan shaker-style workbench. I was nervous about how much I was going to have to spend on bar clamps. Good old Craigslist. About 90 miles south and worth the drive, I got 48 bar clamps for $275. And most of them are name brand, and they're all in good shape, and I'm just delighted. So anyway, I appreciate you being patient with this project. I appreciate your input. I appreciate your stories of where you find your bargains on tools, because we all need to save our money when we can. And if you've got a better source than the local Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace listing, please let us know in the notes. Thanks for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.